Let's now add the stomp on the player. So open the player scene, and in the player scene, we need to add some tool also to detect the enemy. In the final game, we've used an area here as well, an area called enemy detector. Select the player node, Control A, let's add an area 2D, and we'll call it enemy detector. This one is going to specifically detect the enemy. So we mask the second layer, the enemy's layer, and we're going to not put it on any layer. We can also make it non-monitorable. This has the same effect. Now, our enemy detector is going to have a shape a bit larger than our player. So select the enemy detector node, add a new collision shape 2D, and again, that shape is going to be a rectangle shape 2D. Then we want to move the shape up, center it with the player, so you can use the W key to move and click and drag to move the shape up. Note that if you have snapping on, you can toggle it with Shift S, you should have the node automatically snap to the collision shape 2D here. So it will center itself, it will align itself automatically with the other collision shape. Now I'm going to expand that enemy detector to make it a little bigger, but not so much. This is just so we are going to use that area to stomp the enemy. So on the y-axis, we want to make it, to have a small margin under the character so that we can stomp the enemy. And this area is also going to be the death area for our player in this demo. So you want to make it a little larger than the player's collision shape. Now we're going to change its color as well. So with the enemy detector selected, I'm going to go to the visibility tab or category, change the modulate color to, let's say, something blue as well. So still what works best. All right. With that, we're going to connect our enemy detector with the player. So the enemy detector detects everything on the enemy layer. Actually, we have to go back to the enemy scene and make the stomp detector be on the enemy layer and be monitorable. We'll need that to detect when we stomped the enemy. So let's do it like that. We're going to save, go back to the player scene. And when we detect an area, it will necessarily be the stomp detector. So we will make the character jump at this point. And if the area detects a body, it will necessarily be the enemy that touched the player, so the player should die. Let's do it like that. So enemy detector, we're going to go to the node tab. On area entered, we're going to double click that and create an on enemy detector area entered on the player. We create that function. Remember, it opens the player script and creates the function at the bottom of the script. So we're going to move it up and put it above our physics process here. Now when the area entered, we want to stomp. So we can do velocity equals. We're going to add a new function called calculate stomp velocity, similar to how we calculate the move velocity down there. So let's write calculate move velocity, but I'm going to replace move with stomp, expand the script editor, and we are going to pass two variables to that. One is going to be our input velocity. Another one is going to be a new property, the stomp impulse. And the stomp impulse is going to be a configurable variable that is specific to the player. So in the player script, outside of any function, we're going to export a new variable called stomp impulse, and we can set it to, let's say, 1000 pixels per second. Now we have to create our stomp velocity function. I'm going to add it at the bottom of my script here. New function calculate stomp velocity. We're going to take two parameters. Linear velocity will be the first one, and the second one will be stomp or impulse, let's say. And it's going to be a floating point value. Like the move velocity calculate function, we're going to return a vector2. Now in the function, we are going to create a new velocity or an out variable. It's going to start at linear velocity. It's going to be a copy of our start velocity. And the out.y is going to be equal to minus impulse here. And we'll return our output here. So what this does is fairly simple actually. It just replaces the y component of our linear velocity vector with minus impulse. It's like jumping, except that our stomp impulse is a different value from our usual jump. Note that while doing all this setup, as moving forward in the game, you might have different types of enemies. You might want an enemy with a bumper or something like that. Splitting that logic to a function makes it a bit easier to make the character bump at different heights. You can also use that function to make complex calculations for how the jump works. That is why we, again, split our code into functions. It also helps to read that, okay, here we calculate the stomp velocity, we make the character jump. And that stomp impulse that we have on the player is configurable. So when you click on the player in the editor, you have now the stomp impulse variable that you can change to make the character jump higher when it stomps an enemy. We can try the game now and see that the player, when you fall on an enemy, jumps thanks to that new function. We're going to go to the enemy detector to add the ability for the player to die. So select the enemy detector, go to the node tab, and when a body enters that area, we're going to make the player die. So double click the body entered signal, let us connect it to the player, and grab that function created at the bottom of the script, cut it, move back to the top, and add it right below our previous function. I'll expand the script editor once again, and we're going to queue the character free when the enemy entered the enemy detector area. Now if you play the game with F5 and the enemy touches the player, it's going to kill the player here, as you can see. But if you jump on the enemy, you stomp it. Now, this is a, let's say, relatively easy way to code the system. You will see that if the area is too small here, or you move it down to be too close to the enemy's collider, well, the player will die, and sometimes they will both die together, the player and the enemy. So you have to be wary of that the area should be big enough so that the player doesn't touch the enemy and doesn't die when it falls into that stomp area. This is why I made it fairly big and placed it above the enemy's collision box right here.